Since 2020, China has been trapped in a deep deflationary slowdown. Many people assume that this is just another cyclical downturn, and that after 2 or 3 difficult years, the economy will recover just as it has in the past. But I believe this time is fundamentally different. What most people don't realize is that this is not a temporary recession. In fact, the broad trajectory of China's economy over the next 2 decades has already been determined by one overwhelming force. My conclusion is this: China's economy is likely to remain weak for roughly the next 8 years, followed by a brief recovery lasting 3 or 4 years, before slipping into an even deeper and far more prolonged period of deflationary stagnation. In this video, I will show you the data, the logic, and a simple but powerful analytical model that explains why deflation is likely to remain the defining theme of China's economy for decades to come. When people discuss demographics, they usually focus on indicators such as the fertility rate, the birth rate, or the dependency ratio. However, I don't think these measures have a clear or direct relationship with economic performance. Their explanatory power is actually quite limited. To answer this question properly, I spent a great deal of time collecting and organizing demographic and economic data from both China and Japan. I processed the data in different ways, experimented with different variables, and searched for the one indicator that best explains the long-term economic trends in both countries. Eventually, I found what I believe is the key variable. It's remarkably powerful, yet surprisingly easy to understand. The logic behind it is straightforward, and its ability to explain long-term economic performance is exceptionally strong. I call this variable WAP. Let me begin by showing you 3 charts. Together, they clearly demonstrate how this variable WAP has shaped the economic trajectories of both Japan and China. First, look at this chart. The yellow line shows the growth rate of Japan's real GDP per capita, while the blue line represents WAP. Can you see how closely the 2 lines move together? GDP growth fluctuates from year to year, but it generally moves around the WAP line. In other words, its long-term trend is largely determined by WAP. And notice that I'm using the growth rate of real GDP per capita. This measures how fast output per person grows each year. It is roughly equivalent to the growth rate of average national income per person. And because it is adjusted for inflation, it directly reflects changes in the living standards of ordinary Japanese people. Now look at the second chart. The blue line is still Japan's WAP, while the brown line shows Japan's unemployment rate. Do you notice that the 2 lines are almost mirror images of each other? When the blue line falls, unemployment rises. When the blue line rises, unemployment falls. This blue WAP line almost determines the long-term direction of unemployment. Put differently, when WAP rises, more jobs are created across the economy. When WAP falls, job opportunities become scarcer. And to put it even more simply, WAP directly affects people's incomes. When jobs are plentiful, incomes naturally rise. When jobs are scarce, incomes come under pressure and everyone is forced into increasingly intense competition. This is exactly what we would expect, isn't it? Now let's look at the chart for China. The blue line is China's WAP, and the red line shows the growth rate of China's real GDP per capita. Once again, you can clearly see that WAP determines the broad long-term trend of real GDP growth per person. We excluded the data before 1980 because at that time, China was going through the Cultural Revolution, and society was close to economic and institutional collapse. That was not a normal economic environment. After the launch of reform and opening up, However, the relationship becomes very clear. Apart from a few exceptional periods, such as 1989, the global financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, and the pandemic in 2020, the two lines move remarkably closely together. Now, my friends, here comes the most important part. This blue line reveals China's future. It begins to rise significantly after 2034, but then falls sharply again after 2040. If the historical relationship continues to hold, China's economy is unlikely to improve meaningfully before 2031. Between roughly 2034 and 2038, however, China may enjoy a precious 3 or 4 year period of economic prosperity. But after 2040, the economy could once again fall into a deep and prolonged period of stagnation and deflation. Now let's get into the hardcore analysis. What exactly is this blue line, and why does it appear to be so powerful? This blue line, which I call WAP, measures the annual net change in the working age population. The simplest way to calculate it is to take the number of people turning 20 in a given year and subtract the number of people turning 60. The result is the net annual increase or decrease in the population aged between 20 and 60. So where do these numbers come from? They are actually already known. To estimate how many people will turn 20 in a certain year, we simply look back 20 years at the number of births and adjust roughly for infant and childhood mortality. To estimate how many people will turn 60, we look back 60 years and do the same. In this way, the number of births in the past give us a fairly reliable estimate of the number of people entering and leaving the working age population decades later. I then compare WAP with the growth rate of real GDP per capita. Real GDP growth removes the effect of inflation, so it reflects growth in actual output and real income. And I use GDP per capita rather than total GDP because many people instinctively assume that changes in the working age population may affect total output or total income, but should not affect income per person. That assumption is wrong. This is why I focus on real GDP per capita. I want to say whether the net increase or decrease in the working age population affects the average income of every person in society. Some people may also object that GDP is not the same as income, and that GDP per capita is not exactly equal to income per capita. That is true in a strict accounting sense, but they are broadly connected. GDP is measured in monetary terms, and every unit of output generates a corresponding stream of income. That income appears as wages, salaries, bonuses, business profits, or taxes. One way or another, it eventually flows into someone's pocket. Therefore, over the long run, GDP per capita is a reasonable approximation of income per person, or at the very least, a useful indicator of how average income is changing. Now let's put the two lines on the same chart. As you can see, they are highly correlated. With the exception of 1989 and 1990, they move remarkably closely together. Those 2 years were unusual because China's economic growth collapsed following the political turmoil of 1989, when the government carried out the military suppression of the student demonstrations. If we exclude these 2 exceptional years and run a correlation test on the remaining data, we get a correlation coefficient of 0.72. To put that into perspective, a coefficient of 1 means a perfect one-to-one relationship, while 0 means no linear relationship at all. So 0.72 is a very strong correlation. We can also run a regression analysis. The result is even more striking. Changes in the working age population explain about 52% of the variation in China's real GDP per capita growth. That is an extraordinarily high number. After all, economic growth is influenced by countless factors structural reforms, fiscal policy, monetary policy, changes in the global economy, oil prices, and many others. Yet when you add all of those other factors together, they explain less than half of the fluctuations. The single biggest factor accounting for more than half is the change in the working age population. That strongly suggests that the net change in the working age population is the single most important variable driving long-term economic growth. So, why does the working age population matter so much? The logic is actually quite straightforward. A growing working age population means growing demand. Young adults enter the workforce, start families, buy homes, buy cars, and spend money on everything from food and clothing to transportation and entertainment. Most importantly, purchases such as homes and cars generate economic demand far out of proportion of the increase in the working age population. One person's demand can support the jobs of many others. Imagine a young worker earning 100,000 yuan a year in a city where an apartment costs 3 million yuan. To buy that home, perhaps he has 500,000 yuan in savings and have to borrow the remaining 2.5 million from a bank. After buying the apartment, he spends another 100,000 yuan on renovations and 150,000 yuan on a car. Altogether, he has created 3.25 million yuan of demand. That amount spending is enough to support the annual salaries of about 32 workers earning 100,000 yuan each. That's the power of young people entering the economy. Middle-aged households contribute as well. As their incomes rise, they upgrade to larger homes and better cars, creating another wave of demand. As long as working-age population keeps expanding, new demand continues to emerge and businesses hire more workers, employment opportunities increase, incomes rise, and the economy remains prosperous, sometimes even overheating. But when the working-age population begins to shrink, demand for homes, cars, and even everyday consumption starts to weaken. The result is fewer jobs, lower incomes, deflationary pressure, and a prolonged economic slowdown. For a long time, many people have held a deeply mistaken belief. They worry that allowing more foreign working-age people into the country will make it harder for them to find a job because, in their minds, immigrants take their jobs. But the data tells a very different story. Just look at Japan. On this chart, the blue line shows the annual net change in the working-age population, while the brown line shows the unemployment rate. Do you notice what happens? Whenever the working-age population declines rapidly, unemployment rises sharply. Whenever the working-age population grows more quickly, unemployment falls. Isn't that completely counterintuitive? Yet that's exactly what the historical data show. So, don't automatically assume that immigrants are taking jobs away from local workers. In reality, they are actually creating jobs. They don't just supply labor, they create far more demand. They need places to live, food to eat, transportation, healthcare, education, entertainment, and countless other goods and services. Therefore, if you want a more prosperous economy and rising incomes, then an inflow of working-age immigrants is something to welcome rather than fear. Now let's return to China. With the exception of a few extraordinary periods, the political turmoil around 1989, the Asian financial crisis in the late 1990s, the global financial crisis in 2008, and the COVID pandemic in 2020. The two lines track each other remarkably well. China's 4 decades of rapid economic growth before 2022 coincided with a sustained increase in its working-age population. The reason is simple. During the 1960s and 1970s, China experienced a massive baby boom. Influenced by the government's pro-natalist policies at that time, around 25 million babies were born every year. As those generations entered the labor force over the following 4 decades, They didn't just provide workers, they also generated enormous demand, fueling China's long-term economic expansion. Then everything changed in 2022. The working-age population began to fall off a cliff. Why? The answer lies in China's birth history. Births surged dramatically in 1962 because they were rebounding from the catastrophic famine of 1958 to 1960, during which tens of millions of people are estimated to have died. Annual births had fallen from more than 24 million in 1957 to fewer than 17 million during the famine. After agricultural policies were adjusted and food production recovered, births rebounded to about 26 million in 1962. 60 years later, the exceptionally large generation reached retirement age all at once in 2022. At the same time, the generation boom in 2002 was much smaller because China's birth rate had already fallen substantially. The result is a massive annual decline in the working-age population. From 2022 onward, China is losing roughly 11 to 12 million working-age people every year. The decline eases to about 8 million in 2027, but then climbs back above 10 million annually through 2031. That is an astonishing number. Think about what 10 million fewer working-age people means. Fewer home buyers, fewer car buyers, and less spending on virtually every category of consumption. 10 million people is roughly the population of a giant city like Hangzhou or Suzhou disappearing from the market every single year. Not surprisingly, China's real estate bubble burst in 2022, and housing prices have fallen by around 40% since then. Recently, there have been signs of stabilization, with higher transaction volumes and modest price increase in some cities. Some people have become excited and are even calling it a major turnaround. But before celebrating, look at the demographic trend. The working-age population is still projected to shrink by more than 10 million people a year until 2031. That long-term trend hasn't changed. Of course, some cities with strong population inflows and limited housing supply may perform much better than the national average, such as Shenzhen. But for China as a whole, the property market is likely to remain weak for at least another 5 years. Based on the demographic data, a more meaningful recovery is unlikely before around 2034. But then we run into an apparent contradiction. From 2023 to 2025, China's reported GDP growth remained close to 5%, even though the working-age population was shrinking rapidly. So what explains this divergence? Personally, I'm highly skeptical of that 5% growth figure. The famous economist Dr. Shan Wengao has argued, based on a range of economic indicators, that China's official growth rate may have been overstated by about 3 percentage points. Looking at the issue from a demographic perspective, I also suspect that the number has probably been inflated, but I do not have direct proof, so all I can say is that the divergence looks highly unusual. We also see electricity generation and consumption growing by around 5%, and in the past, these figures were often used to confirm the strength of economic growth. But today, they are much less reliable. Why? Because the way the economy uses energy has changed dramatically. Many activities that once relied on coal or oil are now being electrified. Electric vehicles are becoming more common. Steel production is increasingly using electric furnaces, and power-hungry data centers are being built on a massive scale. At the same time, many other industries are becoming more energy efficient. So, electricity consumption no longer reflects GDP in the same straightforward way it once did. Judging from the demographic data, the pressure on China's economy may ease somewhat around 2027, when the annual decline in the working-age population temporarily becomes smaller. But expectations should remain modest. The period that truly gives us reason for optimism comes after 2034, especially between 2036 and 2038. During those 3 or 4 years, the annual decline in the working-age population falls sharply. The reason is that China began enforcing family planning policies in the 1970s, causing the number of births to decline year after year. Those smaller generations will reach retirement age during this period, so fewer people will be leaving the working-age population. China's economy will therefore have a good chance of experiencing a long-awaited boom. And if government policy is especially loose and aggressive at the same time, the expansion could even turn into a major asset bubble. This may be the only truly significant opportunity China sees over a period of several decades. So remember this chart, and remember the potential opportunity after 2034. If our reasoning is correct, both the stock market and the property market could experience a powerful surge. That may be the moment when money is almost lying on the ground waiting to be picked up. Remember this possible opportunity, and when the time comes, don't forget that Warren Guan warned you about it years in advance. But we must also remain clear-headed. Once we move beyond 2038, it may be time to step back, because an even more severe demographic crisis will follow. The working-age population will begin falling rapidly again. By 2042, it could decline by 14 million people in a single year, the largest annual drop in history. Then by 2045, it could set another record, falling by 15 million. Why will the decline become so extreme? Because the number of births has collapsed since 2022. Young people simply no longer want to have children, and so far, there is no sign that this trend is reversing. In fact, younger generations appear to be becoming even less interested in starting families. If this trend continues, then after 2045, China's economy may enter a very long and very dark period. Of course, demographics are not destiny in the short run. Government policy can make a tremendous difference. If China were to adopt the right policies, for example, a much larger fiscal stimulus combined with a more accommodative monetary policy, it could significantly reduce the deflationary pressure on the economy. Unfortunately, based on what we have seen so far, China's current leadership does not appear to feel aggressive economic stimulus. If that policy stance remains unchanged over the next decade, the economic challenges are likely to become much more severe, and life could be more increasingly difficult for many people in China. Everything I have discussed today is about the impact of demographics on China's economy. But let me be clear, a country's economy is not determined solely by changes in its working-age population. Institutions, culture, geography, natural resources, and many other factors also matter. Take Iran as an example. Even if it has a favorable demographic structure, its difficult geography, heavy dependence on resource industries, and institutional problems prevent it from fully benefiting from the demographic advantage. China in the 1970s provides another example. Its demographic structure was actually very favorable, but poor institutions and disruptive policies prevented the economy from performing well. The key point is this. If two countries have similar institutions, geography, and resource endowments, the one with the stronger working-age population is likely to enjoy stronger and more sustained economic growth. I know some of you may still be skeptical. The biggest question is probably this: can the working-age population really have such a powerful impact on the economy? And is there evidence from other countries? The answer is yes. In my next video, I will apply exactly the same framework to Japan. We'll examine how Japan's demographic crisis shaped its economy over the past several decades. And I think you will see even more clearly why this indicator is so powerful. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.